The wind had a way of finding every crack in the old plane, sliding under coats and into bones like it had a personal grudge. Out here in eastern Wyoming, winter didn't announce itself. It simply stayed. The lone cowboy noticed her at dusk. She was standing near the edge of the dirt road, just beyond the cattle gate, her coat too thin for the weather and her boots worn down at the heel. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She just stood there, as if she'd been placed by the land itself. He almost rode past. Men like him learned early not to stop. Not for strangers. Not for stories. Not for trouble. His ranch sat miles from the nearest town, and nights were long enough without adding someone else's problems to them. But the horse slowed on its own. The woman lifted her head. Her face was pale from the cold, but her eyes were steady, tired, not afraid, just worn down, like someone who had already lost the argument with life and was done pretending otherwise. "You lost?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. She shook her head slowly. No, that single word carried more weight than it should have. The cowboy dismounted, boots crunching in the frost. Up close, he could see how young she was. Not a girl, but not far from it. Mid-20s maybe. Her hands were red and raw. She'd been walking for a long time. "You shouldn't be out here after dark," he said. "Weather's turning." She looked past him, toward the empty road. "I know." There was a pause, the kind that stretches until someone decides to be honest. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she said. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the distant line of cottonwoods. "There's a town 10 miles east." Her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I don't have 10 miles left in me." Silence again. Wind moved through the grass. The horse shifted. Finally, she spoke again, quiet, careful, like she was placing each word on thin ice. "I'm not worth much," she said, "but I can offer you a warm bed." The cowboy felt the words hit him harder than the cold ever could. He turned away, jaw tightening. Out here, offers like that weren't uncommon. Desperation made people practical, but something about the way she said it flat, without performance, made it worse. "That's not how this works," he said. She nodded. "I figured." Another pause. "I wasn't asking for kindness," she added, "just shelter." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled face. He hadn't touched a woman in over a year. Not since his wife died. Not since the house started echoing. But this wasn't about that. "Get on the horse," he said. She blinked. "What?" "I said get on," he repeated. "It's colder than it looks." She hesitated, then obeyed, climbing up awkwardly as he steadied her. He mounted behind her, careful to keep distance, and turned the horse toward the ranch. They rode in silence. The ranch house came into view just as the sun disappeared completely. Light glowed faintly from a single window. The place wasn't much weathered wood, sagging porch, the kind of house built to last, but never meant to impress. Inside, warmth wrapped around them immediately. The smell of coffee grounds and old pine filled the air. He handed her a blanket. "Sit," she did, perching on the edge of the chair like she didn't want to take up too much space. "I'll put water on," he said. "You look like you haven't eaten." She watched him move around the kitchen with quiet attention. His hands were rough but careful, every motion deliberate. "You don't have to do all this," she said. "I know." Another silence. When he set the bowl of stew in front of her, she froze. Her eyes filled, not dramatically, just enough to shine. "Thank you," she whispered. She ate slowly, like someone afraid the food might disappear if she rushed. He sat across from her, arms crossed, studying the cracks in the table. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," she said after a moment. "Yours?" "Ethan." The fire popped softly in the corner. When she finished eating, she folded the blanket in her lap. "About what I said earlier." He raised a hand. "You don't owe me anything." She looked at him, really looked at him this time. "You sure?" "Yes." The answer came quicker than he expected. "There's a spare room," he added. "It's cold, but it's yours tonight." Her shoulders slumped in relief she hadn't allowed herself yet. That night, Ethan lay awake, listening to the house breathe. The old walls creaked. The wind howled. Somewhere down the hall, a stranger slept under his roof. He didn't know why he'd let her stay. He only knew that when morning came, things wouldn't be the same. The next day began with gray skies and heavier snow. Clara was already awake when he stepped into the kitchen. She stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes that didn't need washing. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied softly, "but I want to." She glanced at him. "I won't be a burden. I'll leave once the road's clear." Ethan poured coffee. "We'll see." She smiled faintly at that, not hopeful, just grateful. Out in the barn later, he caught her watching the horses like she was memorizing them, like she was afraid this place would vanish if she blinked. "You know anything about ranch work?" he asked. She shrugged. I learned fast. That afternoon, as snow fell thick and heavy, Ethan realized something uncomfortable. He didn't want her to leave, and that scared him more than the cold ever could. Morning didn't come gently. The wind rattled the windows like it was trying to be let inside, and snow piled high against the barn doors. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hands, staring at the white blur where the world used to be. Behind him, Clara's footsteps were soft. "I can help," she said. He turned. She had her coat on already, hair pulled back, cheeks pink from the cold that somehow still found its way inside the house. "You don't have to," he replied. "I know," she said again. "But I want to earn my stay." Something in her tone made him pause. Not pride, not fear, just a need to feel useful. "All right," he said funnily, "but you listen. Out here, mistakes cost fingers." She nodded seriously. The day passed in quiet labor. Feeding horses, clearing snow, carrying water. Clara worked harder than Ethan expected. Her movements clumsy at first but determined. She didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks. When her hands cracked and bled, she wrapped them and kept going. At noon, he handed her a sandwich. She took it like it was something precious. "You don't have to rush," he said. She smiled faintly. Habit. They ate leaning against the barn wall, steam rising from their breaths. "So," Ethan said, not looking at her, "where were you headed before you found me?" She swallowed. "Nowhere specific." "That's not an answer." She considered for a moment. "I left Missouri. Bus broke down in Cheyenne. After that, I walked." He frowned. "Why Wyoming?" She laughed softly, humorless. "It was the last place I thought anyone would look for me." That caught his attention. "Look for you." She shook her head quickly. "Not like that. Just people from before." Ethan didn't push. "Out here, you learned when silence was a kindness." That night, snow still fall. Ling. Clara stood in the doorway of the spare room, twisting the blanket in her hands. "Ethan?" she asked. "Yes. If I overstep, tell me." He nodded. She hesitated. "I've learned that when things feel safe, they usually don't last." His chest tightened at that. "You're safe here," he said, surprising himself with how certain it sounded. She didn't reply, just nodded and closed the door. Days passed. The storm trapped them together longer than expected. Roads stayed buried. Town felt farther away with every sunrise. Clara settled into the rhythm of the ranch, like she'd always belonged there, cooking quietly, mending torn gloves, brushing horses while humming songs she never finished. Ethan found himself listening for her footsteps. He also found himself remembering things he'd tried to forget. His wife, Anna, had loved winters, loved how the snow made everything quiet, loved standing on this same porch, leaning into him, laughing about nothing. Clara never asked about the woman in the faded photograph on the mantel, but her eyes lingered there sometimes. One evening, as firelight flickered across the room, she finally spoke. She was beautiful. Ethan's throat tightened. "She was." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I shouldn't." "It's all right," he interrupted. Silence had done enough damage already. Her name was Anna. Clara nodded respectfully. "What happened?" "She got sick," he said simply, "and then she was gone." Clara hugged her knees. "I know what it's like. To lose something that felt permanent." He looked at her. "You lost someone?" She hesitated. "I lost who I thought I was going to be." That night, Ethan lay awake again, but this time, it wasn't the house keeping him up. It was the way Clara had laughed earlier, just once, when one of the horses nudged her shoulder. It was the way she looked at the ranch like it was a second chance she didn't trust yet. It was the dangerous thought that maybe he didn't want to be alone anymore. The first truck reached the ranch on the 8th day. Ethan saw the tire tracks from the ridge and felt something twist in his gut. Clara saw it too. Her face went pale. "That's the road crew," he said. "Means town's reachable again." She nodded slowly. "That's good." But her voice didn't agree. That evening she packed quietly. Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching her fold the blanket she'd slept under, smoothing it carefully. "You don't have to leave tonight," he said. "I should," she replied. "You helped me. I don't want to take more than that." "You're not taking," he said. "You're." He stopped himself. She looked up. "I'm what?" He didn't answer. She finished packing and slung the bag over her shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He opened the door. Cold air rushed in. She paused on the porch. "Ethan," she said, "that night on the road, I meant what I said. I wasn't trying to manipulate you." "I know," he replied, "but I'm glad you didn't take me up on it." He met her eyes. "So am I." She stepped down into the snow, boots crunching. Halfway to the gate, she stopped. "If I don't say this now, I never will." she said, voice shaking just enough to be honest. Being here reminded me that I don't have to trade myself to survive. Ethan felt something break open in his chest. Clara, he said. She turned. You don't owe me anything, he continued. But if you want to stay, not because you have nowhere else, but because you choose to, you can. She stared at him, snow falling thick between them. Are you sure? She whispered. No, he admitted, but I'm willing to find out. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then Clara dropped her bag. She walked back, slowly, like she was afraid he might change his mind. Inside, warmth wrapped around them again, but this time it felt different. This time, it felt like a beginning. Later that night, as they sat across from each other at the table, Clara spoke quietly. There's something you should know. Ethan nodded. I'm listening. There are things in my past, she said. Mistakes. People. I didn't always make good choices. He met her gaze steadily. None of us did. But some of mine might catch up to me. He took a breath. Then we'll deal with them, if they do. Her eyes filled not with tears, but with something like hope she didn't quite trust yet. Outside, the wind finally began to die down. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like winter was winning. The knock came just after sunrise. Not loud, not urgent, but heavy enough to change the air inside the house. Ethan was pouring coffee when he heard it. 3 slow knocks, controlled. The kind made by someone who expected the door to open. Clara froze at the table. Her hand tightened around the mug, knuckles whitening. For a moment, she didn't breathe. I'll get it, Ethan said. No, she replied too quickly. He turned to her. Her face had gone pale again, the way it had when she first saw tire tracks on the ridge. This might be about me, she said quietly. Ethan studied her, then nodded once. Then I'm still getting it. He opened the door. 2 men stood on the porch. One older, wearing a county jacket dusted with snow. The other younger, stiff-backed, eyes sharp as they flicked past Ethan into the house. Morning, the older one said. Road crew told us someone's been staying out here. Ethan stepped forward, blocking the doorway without thinking. That a problem? The younger man spoke. We're looking for a woman. Name's Clara Hayes. Clara stood. I'm here, she said. The men turned. The younger one's jaw tightened. There you are, he said. You left before things were settled. Ethan felt the tension snap tight. Who are you? Ethan asked. The older man sighed. Sheriff's office, nothing criminal. Not exactly. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't steal anything. No, the sheriff said, but you disappeared. Read with someone else's money. And someone else's mess. Ethan looked at her. Is that true? She nodded slowly. I worked for a man who ran bad businesses. When he skipped town, the blame landed on me. And the money? Ethan asked. I took enough to leave, she admitted. Not to hide, just to survive. The younger man scoffed. Funny way of surviving. Ethan's voice hardened. You here to arrest her or talk? The sheriff held up a hand. We're here to make sure she's alive and hear her side. That's all? Clara took a breath. I'll come with you. Ethan turned to her sharply. You don't have to decide that right now. She met his eyes. I do. Inside the truck, snow pressed against the windows as the engine idled. Clara stared straight ahead. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to be seen as a problem, she said softly. I've been one my whole life. Ethan shook his head. You're not a problem. She smiled sadly. You don't know everything. Then tell me. She swallowed. I learned early that being useful was safer than being loved. So I made myself useful. To the wrong people. Ethan exhaled slowly. And now I'm tired. The sheriff cleared his throat. Miss Hayes, if you come in, there's paperwork. Questions, but no charges. That money's already been recovered. Clara blinked. It has. The younger man looked annoyed. Weeks ago, her shoulders sagged. So I ran for nothing? She whispered. No, Ethan said. You ran toward something. She looked at him, eyes glossy. I can't promise this won't be messy, she said, or that I won't disappoint you. Ethan leaned closer. I already lived through losing someone. I'm not afraid of staying. The sheriff watched quietly. Finally, Clara nodded. I'll come in, clear my name. The truck pulled away. The house felt empty without her. Ethan spent the day working harder than necessary, mending fences that didn't need fixing, brushing horses already clean. The silence pressed down heavier than snow ever had. That night, he sat at the kitchen table alone. He didn't know what he was waiting for. 2 days later, a familiar truck returned. Clara stepped out slower this time, tired, but standing straighter. Ethan didn't say anything when she reached the porch. He just opened the door. Inside, warmth wrapped around her again. "It's done," she said. "No charges, just apologies that came too late." He nodded. "You okay?" She shrugged. "I think so." She hesitated. "I don't expect anything from you. I know this was a lot." Ethan studied her face. The woman who had once offered herself for shelter now stood asking for nothing. "You're still welcome," he said. "If you want to be," she exhaled, shaky. "I want to stay, but not because I need to." "Good," he replied, "because I don't need you either." She smiled at that. "I choose you," she said. He felt something settle into place. Spring came slowly. Snow melted into mud. Grass returned. Clara learned the R. Anch as if it were a language she'd always known but never spoken aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stood beside Ethan at the fence line. "You know," she said, "that first night I thought warmth was all I deserved." Ethan shook his head. "You deserve dignity." She leaned into him, not desperate, not offering, just present. And for the first time in a long while, the ranch felt like more than a place to survive. It felt like home. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It came in small permissions, snow pulling back, inch by inch, mud turning soft instead of frozen, the sky learning how to be blue again. Ethan noticed the change one morning when Clara opened the window without flinching. Cold air still slipped inside, but it didn't bite anymore. She stood there quietly, breathing it in like someone testing a promise. "You ever think about leaving?" Ethan asked from the table. She shook her head. "Not the way I used to." That was how things were now. They didn't make declarations, they noticed truths. As they appeared, Clara stayed. Not as a guest, not as a favor, but as a choice made again every morning. She learned the land slowly, where the ground dipped, which fences lied about holding, which horses trusted silence more than commands. Her hands grew stronger. Her laugh came easier. Ethan watched all of it from a careful distance. Love, he had learned, wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It showed up and stayed. Sometimes they worked side by side, without speaking for hours. Sometimes they talked until the fire burned low, sharing small pieces of the path, like they were trading stones, nothing sharp, nothing thrown. One night, Clara broke the quiet. "I used to think my body was my only currency," she said, softly. Ethan didn't interrupt. "I thought warmth had to be earned. That safety always came with conditions." She stared into the fire. "You never asked for anything." Ethan swallowed. "Because you're not something to be spent." She nodded, tears catching in her lashes but not falling. "I know that now." Town came back into their lives slowly too. Groceries, mail, familiar faces that learned Clara's name without suspicion. No one asked questions she didn't volunteer answers to. At the feed store, a woman smiled at Clara and said, "You look settled." Clara paused, then smiled back. "I am." She meant it. Summer arrived the way it always did, sudden and unapologetic. Fields turned gold. Days stretched long. Evenings cooled just enough to invite closeness. One night, as cicadas hummed and the sky darkened, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch steps, shoulders barely touching. "You ever regret stopping that night?" Clara asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "Every day I'm grateful I didn't keep writing." She nodded. "I almost didn't speak." "What made you?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I was already tired of surviving." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full. They didn't rush what came next. Affection grew the way trust does, slow, deliberate, mutual. A hand brushing another, a shared look that lingered, laughter that didn't apologize for itself. The night they finally kissed, there was no urgency, just certainty. Clara rested her forehead against his chest afterward, listening to his heartbeat like it was something she earned simply by existing. "This feels different," she whispered. "It is," Ethan said. "It's chosen." Autumn returned. With it came color and memory, and a sense of circle closing gently. One evening, Ethan stood alone by the fence, where he'd first seen her months ago. Clara joined him, slipping her hand into his. "You know," she said, "I used to introduce myself by what I could give." He squeezed her fingers, and now I just say my name." He smiled. "That's enough." Winter came again. But it wasn't cruel this time. Inside the ranch house, warmth held steady, not just from the fire, but from the life built quietly between two people who had learned that shelter didn't have to be traded and love didn't have to be begged for. Clara stood by the window one snowy evening, watching flakes fall gently. "I'm not worth much," she said softly, echoing words from another lifetime. Ethan stepped behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. That's where you were wrong, he said. She leaned back into him. Outside, the land rested. Inside, they were home.